Kerbal Klassroom! Welcome to class. Today's lesson, let's go to the moon. Okay, let's actually just go to the moon today. We're going to load the PT Series Munsplorer, hit the yellow open button, scroll down to the alphabetically PT Series Munsplorer stock. Okay, load it up, and you'll see that it has a fair amount of delta V. It's got a couple of side boosters, middle booster, booster with a Terrier engine, and then a couple of liquid fuel engines at the top with a Terrier. This guy has a Communitron and a tiny parachute and a heat shield. I'm using the Q key, Q, to rotate my ship. Because I want to have the flat side of these guys parallel to the direction I'm turning, so they act more like wings. And when I jettison them, they're not going to collide with the bottom. And I'm going to start turning a little bit. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. You'll see that there's little markers on the nav ball that mark the angle that we're pitched to. And I'm pitching as my prograde moves. I'm kind of keeping it on that little edge of the circle. We've hit 15 kilometers and we're about to run out of fuel on these stages. 700 meters per second and 19 kilometers. Okay, drop the boosters. Let's switch to orbital and follow prograde. We are kind of facing to the right a little bit, and you can see our inclination increasing. I'm going to hit the A key and rotate just a little bit so that we aren't getting into a high inclination. We want to stay close to a zero inclination. And as we follow the prograde, we are increasing the magnitude of our orbital velocity more than we're worrying about changing the direction. We're letting our arc of our current suborbital trajectory turn the ship for us. Now I've got the inclination down a little bit more. I'd like it to be 1% or less, preferably. And my apoapse height is now pushing 100. I'm going to just let the ship drift up to close to that. Now that I'm in the range that I want to be, I'm going to let the ship turn towards prograde. I have about 40 seconds. I need to add about 800 meters per second of delta V, and you can see that it takes about 47 seconds to burn through about 1,000 delta V, so I'm going to start my burn now at 30 seconds prior. And then I'm going to move closer to my actual apoapse again, since I don't want to spend so much time burning when I'm not actually at the apoapse. I'm just trying to circularize my orbit. And there we go, 108 and 102. Okay, now I have 150 meters per second left of this stage. From experience, I know I need roughly 860 meters per second of delta V to get to the moon. So I'm going to actually run out of this stage, and then it's going to turn into this stage. So let's switch to map view, bring up our gimbal, and look for the moon. Left click on it, hit set target. We do have a relative inclination of 1.3 degrees, which you can also see on Flight Engineer. We're going to find Mun, rotate it so that it's about 100 degrees off. So here's 90, about there, that's 100. And then grab the, make a maneuver node at the bottom. Bring this out to, so your apoapse is in line with the orbital circle, because Mun is perfectly circular and has a zero inclination. And then grab the white circle and rotate until you see these two things meet. These are the closest approach markers. It says where the ship and the planet will be when they're at their closest point in your orbit. Now, if you notice, the orange dotted line has a encounter marker over here. Let's rotate this a little bit so it's farther away so you can see it. Yeah. So there's a little circle with an arrow pointing in that turns into this purple line, and then a purple circle with an arrow pointing out. This is your encounter with Mun, and then your escape. And depending on where you are when you hit the flyby, let's go ahead and focus on Mun. This is the direction you're coming. We're going to either do a gravitational assist, which will increase our speed, or will decrease our speed, and sometimes that's called a gravitational slingshot. Okay, so if we grab our maneuver node and you see it come there, let's change the angle a little bit. There, I had to add just a little bit more delta V. Okay, so if I'm doing a flyby from this direction, the green circle or ellipse is the direction that I'll be going after I escape the sphere of influence of the Mun. And let's circle back here. This shows that I would pass by Mun and then start on this green circle, and I would have another Mun encounter over here. I want to, let's increase, there we go, just a hair extra of delta V. Okay, so if we pass by on this side, we're going to increase our velocity, and if we pass by on this side, we're going to decrease our velocity. And you can tell because as we come through here, if the escape is pointing towards the opposite direction that the Moon is traveling, then we're basically leaving retrograde to the Moon. So imagine that we got into an orbit with the Moon, and we're just kind of circling it. If we wanted to escape the Moon and end up in a tighter orbit, it's like we wanted to burn retrograde. So if you're going this direction, you're going to decrease your speed, and if you are going this direction, you're going to increase your speed. Here, let's change it just a hair. There we go. So you can see that's a much larger orbit. That's called gravitational assist. and I will show you at the end of this the Wikipedia article for gravity assist. I'd like you to look at that for your homework and understand how that happens. How can going by a planet increase or decrease your velocity? Anyway, so I want to show you what frequently is planned in NASA missions. When you go by the moon and you want to come home, if you plan your flyby of the moon in a gravity assist that gives you reduced velocity instead of increased velocity, you can end up in what's called a free return trajectory. Let's go ahead and alter this just a little bit. I want to follow this periapsis. So if I end up being in a with a periapsis about 30 kilometers. Oops. There we go. Let's go with 20. That means that I can fly by the moon. If my engines stopped working and I flew by it, I would come by and enter the atmosphere, and I could do my aero braking and my parachuting, so that if I finished my burn and somehow in the middle of my flight, like the Apollo 13, if you had issues, you just continue on. You lose a little bit of your energy, and your periaps gets pulled in towards the planet. Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and warp to next maneuver. I double clicked on Kerbal to set that as my focus point. I forgot I need to actually be in the vessel view in order to detach my stage. And now I could be pointing at my maneuver node. I'm pointing prograde because I want to focus all of my attention on increasing my the vector that I have for going forward. I don't want to waste my time changing direction. I'm just going to let the gravity turn give me my my change of direction. And if I get too close to the end and it still is off by a bit, then I can adjust that. But the most efficient direction to burn when increasing your trajectory is, and so I can shut off my engine or change. I'm just gonna burn the rest of it in this direction. You can see my apoap's height getting close. I'm gonna hit X, and I come over here, look back at my focus view, and I'm really close to the position I wanted. If I cancel that out and look, I would enter the atmosphere a little bit high, but that's fine. I'm actually going to warp up here. I'm going to hit F5 to save in case I want to revert something. Okay, now you can see that I would be coming a little bit high, going downward past the moon, and that will change my orbital inclination by quite a bit actually. I was at about 1.6 degrees inclination, but doing that burn and coming up a little bit high from the mun, it will give me a bunch of downward angular momentum from the gravity assist and change my my inclination if I just did a flyby. I'm going to time warp into the next stage, the orange thing, and it's going to turn into a blue thing. The blue one is always your current. Orange is next, and then purple, and then green, and then I think red or something like that. So you can keep adding maneuver nodes. But remember, Kerbal Space Program uses a sphere of influence model. You only are dealing with two bodies physics when it's calculating all the different things pulling on the ship. There's only the planet you're currently orbiting or the moon that you're currently orbiting. Okay, anyway, so we're going to fire retrograde. We're going to fire at the periapsis. That is the closest approach. It is the most efficient place to do your burn, and the only reason why you would want to burn early is if the amount of time that you need to do your burn takes so long that you've already gone really far away. I'm starting my burn. I have about 600 delta V left in this stage, which will be nice for circularizing my orbit. And as you can see, as this blue circle gets closer to orbit, the orange circle gets closer to Mun's orbit. And once we've circularized enough to not have an escape trajectory, we are in the same orbit of Kerbin as the Mun. We just happen to be circling Mun like that. Now I'm going to keep burning until my my periapse, the closest approach, is about 20 kilometers. Maybe I'll do 30, because I think that the speed that you can time warp, I can't remember exactly what it is, but based off how far away from planets and moons you are, limits the amount of time warp you can do. So if you go too low, then you can't time warp very fast. Okay, so I'm going in this direction, and I'm going to bring the closest approach so that I'm this one says 6 kilometers. I'd like to actually right up here initiate my retrograde burn so that I land in this crater. I could also try landing in this crater, or this one, or just anywhere. There are different biomes, which if you were playing on science or career mode, when you collect science in those places, they will give you science points, and you can keep track of things like that. Let's just warp a little bit, and then we have 133 meters per second of delta V left. And again, we're firing in the retrograde direction. And there's the crater that we're going to be landing in. Let's go ahead and warp just a little bit more until we're over the crater. You can watch up here, the highlands biome, we're going to turn into crater. There we go, far side crater. I am now going to burn retrograde, and I'm going to switch to surface instead of the orbital. I press G for gears to turn on the gears to my landing legs. And I don't want to fight my dropping speed. I just want to decrease my horizontal speed until it's really close to 0. Oops, I think I've gone too far. Yep, there we go. So now if I follow this down, I only have 6 meters per second of horizontal speed. I have negative 52 meters per second of vertical speed. And so if I wanted to, I could try doing what's called a suicide burn, kind of like SpaceX Falcon 9 landings, where you wait till the last second and then you start burning. That is the most efficient way to land, is to do a suicide burn and land that way. The less time that you spend just falling like this, the better. I could have tried getting a little bit closer than the 24 kilometers, and when I'm passing over the crater, be a little bit lower, so that by the time I cancel out my horizontal velocity, I'm, just a couple kilometers up. There's a nice Kerbal set. Okay, so I'm currently going 143 meters per second. This says that it takes a minute to go through 1,537 meters per second. So it's going to take me at least 10 seconds to slow my descent. This is my altitude. This is my sea level altitude. Those are not the same thing. You want to be watching your altitude, not your sea level altitude. Now you can burn and reduce your speed. Don't reduce it to 0 too high. Just kind of bring it down by little steps, and you will not go too fast in your landing, but you also don't want to be going too slow in your landing, because then you have to waste a bunch of fuel fighting all that time that you're accelerating from gravity. And if you can try landing about 3 meters per second, that's pretty dang good. One meter per second is even better. Okay, so I've landed. I've got 1,283 meters per second left, and I think that's probably going to be fine getting back to Kerbin. It's been a little while since I've done a Mun landing. I think that should be fine. You can use the subway map calculator that I've shown you in the past to figure out. And so you have two options. You can either launch and circularize at like 10-kilometer orbit, or you can do what's called a direct ascent. Now, when we try to get to Kerbin, we want to have our escape as close to this line as possible. So if we actually rotated the moon by 180 degrees, so we were sitting over here, and we just fired straight out, that would be a fairly efficient way to get out. I'm going to fire and go this direction, and show that if we start about right here and add, so that we're going, I think, about 800 meters per second, that we will be able to safely get to Kerbin. Let's go ahead and show though that we can EVA, hit the R button, and you can turn on your RCS. You can plant your flag, take a surface sample, get an EVA report if you want. This is kind of some of the funner role-playing that you can do in Kerbal Space Program, is doing little landings and putting out a flag. I will go over RCS in a different episode, but basically to turn it on, press R, use ASDW, E, and Q to change your direction, forward, backward, left, and right. Up and down is shift and control, and I'm sure you'll have some fun figuring it out. Okay, so I'm going to make sure my SAS is on, and I'm going to want to go in this 90-degree direction. Oops. There we go. And the sooner you can go sideways, the better, as long as you make sure that you don't hit any mountains. About 600 meters per second is pretty dang fast for a circular orbit. So yeah, I'm already at a apoapse of 20. Okay, so if I continue and if I burn this direction, that would bring my apoapse down to 3.8 million meters. I want it much lower. I need to add about 280, maybe 300, closer to 300 meters per second of delta V, and also rotate so the escape happens right on that dot, or the line, I mean. Having about a 35 kilometer periapse is great. I'm going to go ahead and click on my maneuver node. So 317 meters per second, and I have about 700 meters per second left, which means I had plenty to spare. Okay, let's go ahead and warp to our maneuver. You can watch the maneuver node time down here. 4 3/4 minutes left. And it's only a 12-second burn, so I'm gonna go all the way to 6 seconds left. And I can finish it off just by watching this periapse. I just pressed shift once to just kind of get my ship going in the right direction. Let's make sure we're going prograde. And once that hits 35, I'm going to hit the control button. There we go, 26. That's a little bit steep, but that's fine. Okay, so again, we're trying to make it so that this escape happens as close to the line of retrograde for MUN as possible. That means that when we leave the sphere of influence, it's like we added a retrograde vector directly with the retrograde direction. If we had instead put it on this side, we would be in a higher orbit and maybe get to min-miss. Getting to min-miss is actually pretty easy, and landing there takes less delta V than landing on MUN, because MUN is 3 times the mass, or gravity at least, 3 times the gravity. Okay, we're now leaving the sphere of influence of MUN. I recommend going to where it switches between spheres of influence and then warping just past it. Sometimes if you're time warping really fast through these changes, the physics engine doesn't do what it should, and so it just ends up being better to slow down, go through the change of sphere of influence, and then you can time warp again. Okay, so we want to be facing in the retrograde direction and warp to just about where the atmosphere is. Atmosphere starts at 70 kilometers. I'm at 180. And so if I want, I can reduce some of my orbital speed with my engine. I'm just going to let the atmosphere do its job. But if we wanted to, we could have slowed down some extra with that. And then let's go ahead and time warp until we get into the atmosphere, 70 kilometers. And the first little bit, I'm going to time warp the physics so that we don't have to watch it. But if you watch the apoapse height drop down, we're already at half the apoapse height. Woo! That was the that flip around was mostly because I'm doing this time warp. It probably wouldn't have done that if I hadn't. And I am in a nice 27 kilometers high. I'm not doing any more time warping because it is just too much atmosphere to deal with that. My periapse is already nice and low, and my speed is dropping significantly. When my speed gets to about 270 meters per second, I can deploy my chute, or whenever this turns into the white color. Red means not safe. Or you can watch this. It says unsafe right now, and when it turns to safe, then you can deploy. And 600 meters per second. I'm going to go ahead and time warp a bit. Now it says it's safe. Whoever built the rocket also added the heat shield to staging. You can right click on it in the VAB and add it to staging, or if you don't have it as part of the staging, when you want, you don't have to, but if you want, you can right click on the heat shield and it will have a menu option to jettison. My parachute will deploy at about 1 kilometer above the surface. In this case, 1 kilometer above sea level, and 1 kilometer above the atmosphere, above the surface is the same thing. Anyway, so that is how you get to moon and back. I want you to check out the Wikipedia page on gravity assists and learn about free return trajectories as well, and how in the event of an engine malfunction, you can safely get back to your home planet and do an aero brake if your engine cuts out and you can't finish your mission. When we land, whether on the water or splashdown, then instead of just seeing the Space Center option, you can recover your vessel. Here's the page on Gravity Assist, which I would like you to read. Here's a simple explanation, and it basically comes down to you're stealing the momentum of the planet that you're getting a gravity assist from, and changing the direction of travel that you're going. The planet either steals some of your momentum in the positive or negative direction as well, but since it's ginormous and you're tiny, the planet will hardly notice at all, but you'll notice quite a bit. Why gravity slingshots are used, historical origins, and limits. So a famous example of how the slingshot maneuver was used was in the Grand Tour mission from the Voyager space probe that has left our solar system. There's also quite a few examples: Mariner 10, Voyager 1, Galileo, and like we saw in our flyby of Mun, you can also change your orbital plane inclination quite a bit. And so if you want to fly by with a downward or upward direction as you go by a planet, you can also change your inclination. The Messenger probe used gravity assist quite a bit to slow down because getting to Mercury is very expensive for Delta V. Cassini space probe used multiple gravity assists, came by Venus twice and Earth once, and then flew by Jupiter, and then finally got to Saturn. The reason why gravity assists are so great is because if you time your flyby, you don't have to bring so much fuel because you can just get extra momentum from those. The problem with gravity assists is you sometimes extend the length of the mission significantly. So the let's see what the messenger mission took a lot longer because they were using flybys, but it cost a lot less because they didn't have to have quite as big of a launch vehicle. Rosetta and this Solar Probe Plus as well. Anyway, so that's one thing to look at, and then the other thing that I want you to look at is, so this is the free return trajectory for Earth-Moon or Earth-Mars transfers, and you can see there's lots of different options in the Earth-Mars free return trajectory. That would be great because if you're going all the way to Mars and something messes up in the several-month journey, then you can get back to Earth safely, although it will take a very long time, so hopefully you brought enough food.